Welcome back, everybody, to the Nonprofit Show. It's a Monday. We're really excited because we're talking about interim work. But interestingly enough, we're going to be talking about interim leadership with development leaders and fundraising. We're welcoming Joan McBride and our friend Jeffrey Wilcox. Jeffrey, I'm going to call you friend of the show.
Thank you. Truly a friend.
Yeah, super friend. This is going to be, Joan, you're going to be a new friend after this
Okay. Well, thank you. I love making new friends.
This is going to be a really interesting conversation, one we've never had before, about the marriage between interim leadership and fundraising. And so I can't wait to learn more from you and see what we've got cooking. You know, we always have a lot cooking on the Nonprofit Show because we have amazing partners, and they include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT Consulting, Interim Executives Academy, Your Part-Time Controller, Fundraisers Friday, and one of our newest sponsors, Holdings for Good. It's a bank just for nonprofits. I could not be more excited to welcome them. So you'll be learning and hearing more from them. Again, I'm Julia C. Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. But more importantly, I'm welcoming Joan McBride. She's the CEO of GreatRake, McBride and Associates. Welcome, Joan.
Thank you very much. Pleased to be here.
I'm really excited. Jeffrey R. Wilcox, he's the president of Interim Executives Academy. Jeffrey, I just always love being able to chat with you because you have such an interesting, awareness of the national landscape of this, dare I say, new profession of interim work. And it's really cool to get your perspective. So thank you and welcome back.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with you, Julia.
Lots of fun. Okay, we've got so much to talk about that I want to jump in right away and really kind of talk about something that most people have never thought about. And the interim sector, which we've been learning about this with our friends over at Interim Executives Academy about interim leadership. But Jeffrey, it's always like CEO level and a little bit of CFO maybe. But now we're talking about development and fundraising. How can that be?
Because we have seen in the fundraising profession and the nonprofit sector that we need an intervention. We don't need a consultative intervention. We don't even need a training intervention. We need a new way of helping organizations to really have some critical thinking and some hands-on help to change the way in which the philanthropy function is going to be sustainable and viable in the market, in the environment we see ourselves today. That is not, Julia, a consultative process. That is an evolutionary capacity building organizational development process. So we have fundraising machines and not just fundraising departments.
Wow. So Joan, when I hear, Jeffrey on his soapbox waving the flag, my first thought is, go, brother, this is great. But then my second thought is, do boards and even C-suites understand this or recognize this? That what's brewing?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's job one, is to bring on an organization so that they see the validity and the value in interim executive work. One of the ways I like to look at interim executive work, and specifically development work, is that often we're brought into a situation that's become unstable. And so we're able to stabilize this situation. Another thing that Interim Executives Academy recommends is that an interim in the development space come in for a full year, because that way there is that opportunity to build some relationships, stabilize the situation before turning it over to the ongoing Chief Development Officer. So I think it's really bringing everybody on board that we need a period of stability, and an interim who is typically very experienced, potentially more experienced than who they'll be bringing on long-term, has the wisdom and the background to be able to provide that stability.
So that's fascinating because, Jeffrey, one of the most interesting things that you taught me when I first met you was that one of the big roles of that interim is to take that survey and look at the landscape and take an evaluation Wow, having that for your development team, that blows my mind. What an incredible opportunity.
Well, we need to be real clear what separates a temporary fundraising person from a professional interim chief development officer. And I'm not pairing one as against the other because organizations need both. But there is a significant difference. Interim chief development officers are trained and supported to help evolve the culture of philanthropy versus to come in and temporarily run the philanthropy machine. One is much more organizational in nature. The other is much more what I'll call process in nature. And organizations need both, but we pride ourselves in our boot camps and our academies that our interim development directors are there to partner with an organization to evolve their culture of philanthropy, and that they are there not to do things themselves, but they are there to show others how to do it. Because ultimately, here is when you've been successful. The interim chief development officer is successful when their successor has been in the job more than 2 years.
And actually, I have some thoughts to share on that if I can jump in.
Yeah.
That is one of the things, the last interim I did, I was the chief development officer and the communications officer. And it was a small organization, but the woman who came in after me, I was there from 2021 to 2022. She has been there for 3 years now, doing a great job. They have wrapped up a major capital campaign. They actually received one of, why am I not thinking of her name? Jeff Bezos's ex-wife. Why I'm blanking on her name.
Yeah.
Okay, they received a grant from her, and Mackenzie Scott. There we go. And so they did receive a $2 million grant during that capital campaign. But I feel like I was able to come in, stabilize the situation. I do want to say in that case, it was a very small office. So I did have to manage the day-to-day alongside creating that culture that Jeffrey was just talking about. So I think in some situations, especially if it is a very small development operation, you're doing the day-to-day as well as helping refine the culture.
So I've got to ask you this question, Joan, and this will be hard to answer, but do you think that person that was hired, full on would have stayed for this long without that back end work that you were able to do? Because as we mentioned in the green room, AFP reports, and they track this, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, that the average development director has a tenure of 19 or less months.
Yes, I am very familiar with that statistic. I think it was a factor that certainly helped. I don't have a crystal ball, none of us do, but I think that it was a factor. The CEO there is very strong, has been there since the organization was formed, and I think that was a key help. And then also the organization has an amazing mission. So I think all of those things together are what have come to play with her staying a much longer than average time, over twice the average time at this point. And I think they made a good hire too. I was part of the interview process and kind of the screening phase, and she jumped out as a very strong candidate fairly early on, and she is still there to this day. So 3 years later.
I love it. What a great story, and what a great, I'm just going to call it out, like a confidence builder for this process. Because Jeffrey, it seems very kind of tenuous for a board to say, yeah, we'll get an interim or even a CEO, when they're like, then we're just going to have to start over again. That horrible sense of that. And so I'm fascinated by this as being not just a stopgap, but an actual developmental thing.
Well, Julia, I think that there are, we're a very diverse sector, so it's very difficult to say, there's a lot of truths or givens. I will say in our experience, there is a high level of frustration about the turnover in the fundraising departments. I think there's a high level of frustration about the role of boards and executives in the fundraising process. That has gone on consistently year after year after year. And I would say that I'm seeing more of a trend of organizations now that want to see that cycle broken. And most people recognize Insanity is getting, well, we'll get yet another person to see if they can do it differently. And they found out for the last 10 years that doesn't work.
Right. I love that. Well, I think that kind of leads us into this next part of our discussion about the quick hire. And I want to revisit this because I was somewhat surprised that you both really doubled down on the idea that this interim development director should be there for a year. And I'd love for you to kind of explain that, and kind of talk us through that, because I find that to be a really fascinating and healthy thing versus just get the next warm body in. Joan, what do you think about that?
I think because development work is so cyclical, and because you are doing typically a year's worth of activities between the annual fund, between an event or two you might be doing, I think that that's one reason it's critical, is that you're able to see the organization through an entire year's cycle. And I think that also helps with further stabilization, and also with just making sure you can give them guidance about where there might be things to tweak, where there might be things that, or skills that you feel that the new development director would need based on going through that full year cycle with the organization. So that would be one reason I would think that would be important. I also think that it's just part of creating that stability and creating an environment that sets up the long-term person for increased success, or an increased potential for success.
Wow. Yeah, Jeffrey, go ahead. I think it's so smart, but it's unexpected. I didn't think that you would say this. So go ahead.
I think if the expectation is we're bringing an interim chief development officer into our organization to really evolve a sustainable culture of philanthropy, it's naive to think that that can be done in 90 days or 6 months. Okay. We agree that this is about an organizational development process. And Julia, we teach in our academy, when we give someone a certificate in interim development management, there are 14 protocols that are expected, which means if you don't work over a year to leave these 14 things in a leave behind position, you are weakening the chance of the organization, A, to have a long-term fundraising person follow you, and number two, everything you've built staying in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's really interesting. And it's kind of heartbreaking that we can't start out our organizations with this, right? Like if we had this knowledge and we had this, dare I call it, process and leadership value, maybe we wouldn't have this crisis of turnover. I mean, it's just such an interesting aspect to think about holistically, what this looks like. Let's move into what it takes to become an interim. Joan, I'd love for you to start off this part of our conversation, because as you mentioned, you've done this work. How in the heck did you even get to that level and get to this part of the work?
Yeah. Well, a little bit about my background. I worked for different nonprofit organizations for the first 15 years of my career. Actually started while I was still at university and kind of moved on from there. But then when my husband and I wanted to start our family, we wanted to have an opportunity for me to have good work-life balance. So I had been in the field long enough where I felt I could establish a consulting practice. So I did. I was able to have the best of both worlds, which I've been extremely grateful for. So I was able to, continue to pursue a career that I really love, along with being able to be involved in the PTO and be a Little League mom and be involved when my sons were in Boy Scouts, et cetera, et cetera. But then as my children got older and I had more time available, it made sense to take on interims. And I've known Jeffrey for some years. We served on the board together at AFP Orange County. And so I was acquainted with him, always very greatly respected him and his enthusiasm and passion for the profession. And when he started Third Sector, it's had a couple different names. When he started Interim Executives Academy, the current name, I was able to start getting involved, came on as an affiliate for the organization, and then started taking interims when I was at that stage of my kid's life where I'd be able to devote several days a week to an organization. So that was back I want to say my first interim was in 2011 and 12. So my kids were solidly in high school. They didn't need me quite as much. And I was able to come in and start doing that interim work. So I've looked at it as a way to supplement what I was doing in my consulting business. And then I also, another thing I should mention, I also did all the training through Interim Executives Academy, which greatly set me up for success with all of the different assignments that I've had.
Amazing. Jeffrey, I got to ask this question because I thank you, Joan, for giving us that arc of your own personal story so we can kind of see how it could maybe relate to ours. But is this something, Jeffrey, that you can do remotely, or are these interims need to be placed within their communities? Like, how does that actually function, given that we talk about development so predicated upon building and stewarding relationships?
Well, Julia, like everything in life, it depends. Let's just say that what we want to make sure is that the expectations of what will make a interim chief development officer successful is clear. And then we expect our interims to negotiate with the organization all the resources that will be necessary. This is not a temporary fundraiser. This is a organizational development specialist who is a guru in resource development. That will require both being in the ground and in the community. And there will be times when it's possible to do some things remotely, but I would say that is today's workplace in general.
Interesting. So then let me ask a follow-up question to that, Jeffrey. Are you seeing this interim leadership person and skill set remaining solely with development, or do you see these folks being able to be take an assignment where they're a CEO once, for one project, and then they move into development for another? I mean, how do you see this aligning up?
Well, obviously, there is some intersectionality between individuals who've been CEOs of organizations and have been very active in the fundraising function of their nonprofits. On the other hand, there are some CEOs who have totally avoided fundraising and probably would not be able to do it. What I will say is that we're finding that interim development work is its own management science. One is much more functionality. The other is much more organizational. And the truth is, Julia, there are some CEOs who just can't work for other CEOs. And so you have to look at people, the processes, and the outcome, and make sure it's the right ingredients for that nonprofit to benefit.
Okay, wow. That kind of says it all. The way you just said blows my mind, because I think I appreciate you calling that out. That's incredibly honest. And I think, I think you're right about that. I think that the spirit with which you work and how you work together needs to really be thought of,
It does. And Julia, I will tell you, I think it's important to, answer the question, why did we want to create a course of study here? And the answer to that is because I saw a lot of truly great fundraisers who were being kicked to the curb by organizations. And when they got kicked to the curb, they were leaving our industry. I really got into this business in the academy to lower the attrition rate of exodus of fundraisers. It may appear we're training people to replace folks who leave, but I got to tell you, our why, to quote Simon Sinek, was to help find a new place for long-term development directors to have a new role in bringing this profession to a new level and not being churned out by yet another nonprofit.
Wow, Joan, I love that empathy, and I love that structure and that philosophy. As you started this process, have you seen this evolve and your own attitudes change? I'm really curious because it's still a new concept. Interim leadership is still a new concept, right? Let alone development director.
Right.
What have you seen on this trajectory?
I think in general, when it comes to the field, I think some people are specifically set up well to be interims. They're people that like to go in and right the ship. And a lot of them, I think, have changed organizations because that's kind of their specialty and that's where their skill set really lies. And so I feel like in some ways, this particular career pathway is especially good for people that have more of that skill set of liking to come in and kind of right the ship, get things stabilized, and then move on to the next assignment. So I think that's one thought that immediately occurs to me. In terms of for myself and my own career path, I think it was really just finding additional opportunities to continue to grow professionally and to grow in an area that was unique. So I think that's one of the reasons. And also the fact that there was the flexibility with interim work, I think was key. Because we all know if you're in a full-time development position, you're working a lot of hours. And in the interim work, you have more flexibility. You're able to fit in other projects and other commitments around that. So I think that was a key thing that drew me as well.
Fascinating discussion. I'm really just so interested in this. Jeffrey, as we finish up our time with you, what are you seeing currently in this space? And I know your network is international and you get to hear the voices of so many different people and experience what they're experiencing. Kind of what are some of the lessons that you're seeing? And I ask this question because I feel like you might be able to give us some ideas of what we should be looking for if we're associated with an organization that might be thinking about investing in this. Like what's kind of going on as it stands here and now?
Well, I have a couple ideas, and I know Joan does as well. First of all, Julia, it's so easy to segregate what's happening in the fundraising space from what's happening in the nonprofit space in general. And
Okay.
and I will tell you, one is symptomatic of the other.
Okay.
Our lessons learned right now is the whole notion of what does organizational sustainability mean is a key question that has to be asked, because sustainable fundraising is one discussion. The sustainable organization is the bigger discussion. And where does fundraising fit into that? So one of our current lessons is the more that we stay at a functional level, the more we're robbing organizations of the viability level. And that's what it's all about. And number two, we are still struggling with what does the nonprofit work environment look like for all employees, including the development staff. That's another systematic issue, and how that plays out in a functional issue. The third is, how do we, in the new environment, define equitable fundraising practices in diverse communities? How do we find the right balance to make sure that all voices and all people are involved in being important resources to organizations? That is an organizational issue that our fundraisers and all leaders are facing right now. Joan, I know you have a couple as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, oh, there I am. Okay. I think the big elephant in the room, of course, right now is the situation with the federal cutbacks. Mm-hmm. And, we'll have more of a feel for how that's impacting organizations that have heavily relied on federal funding in the coming weeks and months. But I think that with that happening, obviously that's going to impact potentially and put more stress on the philanthropy side of the house. So how does that all work? What needs to be done? Can philanthropy pick up those cutbacks? Or is it going to need to be more of an organizational re-strategizing? And this is where I feel like things are very much intertwined. So the whole situation around federal funding is a key thing that's going on right now. Another thing is just where does AI fit into all of this? There's so much. I was listening to the news earlier today, and they were talking about how AI is putting up these fake feel-good stories on social media, and how people are thinking they're real and they're not. And one of the stories that was brought up was one I know has come across my own feed a number of times. So how do you use AI potentially to be more efficient, but make sure that you're using it ethically and appropriately. One of the best examples, and it's a simple one, is I've heard people using AI for their auction item descriptions. And so that's a good use, or maybe to kind of get you jump started on Julia, I think you're laughing about that, auction items. But I think also if you're having writer's block, maybe Chat GPT can just give you a running start. But I think it's really looking, I know in our AFP chapter, we've already had a couple of speakers around AI, and just making sure that we really understand the pluses and minuses of that as they relate to our day-to-day work in philanthropy, whether we're an interim or working in a long-term situation.
Right. It's such an interesting aspect because so many of the things that you've brought up, they touch on technology, they touch on the labor conditions, staffing, work sentiment. I mean, there's no secret here that the workforce is changing, and we have 4 generations working together now, and each one of those generations views work differently, work-life balance differently. I mean, it's just a fascinating time to have all of these different inputs, and yet we still have to get things done. We still have to work on a mission.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, it's kind of like mind blowing. I mean, Jeffrey, how do you keep everybody calm and understanding that even though it's a swirl, things can get done?
I will tell you from the moment we opened this academy, I will answer your question the way I talk with every single interim who comes to our academy. We can talk about all of the systems. We can talk about all of the construct of what make nonprofits flourish. But I will tell you, interims have to bring an organization a commodity called hope, because I will tell you, it was hope that put these organizations in business.
Mhm.
And I still am old fashioned enough that it is hope that can keep these organizations finding a way to stay in business in today's environment. Interims who do not put in their briefcase a huge amount of hope to give volunteers and staff the ability to know they can change the world, as crazy as it is, if they don't bring that to the interim profession, we will lose our magic, because we're not consultants who cheerlead. We are leaders who help to instill hope.
Yeah, that's profound. I love that, and that's a great way to end this episode, because that just speaks to the value system of what this entire, I'm going to call it, new path of leadership, this interim path. Jeffrey and Joan, you've taught me so much today. I've really been fascinated by this discussion, and I think it's going to continue. I'm going to have more questions, so just be ready. They're going to be coming your way. Joan McBride, she's the CEO of GreatRake, McBride and Associates, and Jeffrey R. Wilcox, as we called him at the top of the show, friend of the show. He's the president of Interim Executives Academy. Jeffrey, you all and your team, you have a new training coming up. Can you briefly talk to us about what that looks like?
So yeah, we actually provide certificates in the study and advancement of interim development work. The 14 protocols, our processes. It will be 3 weeks in September. Check us out at our website. We also have a free orientation on the 13th of August. But if you've been thinking about how you can make a difference in really changing the landscape of fundraising, we'd like to talk with you. It will be done from the inside out. And we think we're trying to do that with the Academy.
I love it. And so this is an opportunity for somebody, no matter where they are in the country, to move through this in a digital capacity with a cohort, I'm assuming, and then they'll have a group that they can follow and work with as they move along.
That's correct. We will, after graduation, we have roundtables so that interim development directors around the world can remain in touch with each other about how to raise the bar in philanthropy. I also want to give a shout out to Joan McBride. She's a faculty member of that boot camp. Yay. And so having her here and the trailblazing that she's done for all these years, We have a great faculty. This isn't the Jeffrey Show. This is a community of people helping a community of people accomplish something in community.
Absolutely.
I love it. Well, Joan, this has really been fun. And I really appreciate you lending your voice to this conversation and making it personal about why and how you moved into this, and the trajectory that you took. Just a fascinating discussion. I really, really appreciate it. And certainly this conversation is not done. As we move through so many changes in the nonprofit sector, we're going to see the issue of interim leadership, I believe, more and more. I think it's just one of those key things that if you understand it, you can navigate a lot in your organization. And if you don't understand it, you're not familiar with it, I feel like you're really behind the gun. I really do. And so for me, this is like one of the top concepts of where we are in our sector. So I appreciate you both being here to talk about this. It's been really powerful. You know, it's also very powerful. Oh, yeah, Joan, this has been great. You're my new best friend of the week.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I hope you'll consider me a friend of the show now. So.
Yeah, I'll call you friend of the show. You know, we have a lot of friends of this show, and they include our amazing presenting sponsors. They are Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT Consulting, Interim Executives Academy, Your Part-Time Controller, Fundraisers Friday, and holdingsforgood.com. They're a bank just for nonprofits. They just joined us as a sponsor. We're really excited to bring them into, as we like to say, our boat. And so we're going to be learning more and more about them. As we end each and every episode, we like to remind ourselves, our viewers, our listeners, and certainly our guests to stay well so you can do well.